The Pope is easily the most well-known bishop of the Lazio region in Italy. As Bishop of Rome, the Pope naturally has had quite the influence over the region. But for an area which has been as highly populated as Lazio, there are going to be more bishops than just the Bishop of Rome. One neglected diocese is that of Ostia. Ostia, for most of its history, functioned as a port for the city of Rome. As such, these two cities were connected quite closely, not just in secular affairs, but also religious ones. So join me as I will explain the history of the Christian bishopric of Ostia, including its many martyrs and cardinals. The time period covered will span from the beginning of Christianity in Italy to the early modern period. Let us now begin with antiquity. Before any explanation of the religious situation of Ostia can begin, it should be noted that Ostia really is two parts. The city of Ostia itself and Portus, which was a harbor built by the Emperor Trajan. Eventually a city cropped up around it. The history of early Christian Ostia is very much influenced by the various imperial persecutions of Christians in the first 4 centuries of Christianity's existence. There is the famous Saint Arja, who was first tortured by being whipped on a rack. After that, her breasts were burned and her jaw was broken. Finally, she is thrown into the sea with a stone around her neck. There are also the Saints Maximus, his brother Claudius, Claudius's wife Praepedinia, and their 2 sons, Alexander and Carias. They were a notable family, but were sentenced to exile and execution by being burned to death by Diocletian. Among its various martyrs, there is debate around who should be considered the first bishop of Ostia. The earliest candidate is Quiricus. He received support from the aforementioned Saint Aria. She used her wealth to provide him with food and clothes for the newly baptized. Saint Quiricus will be martyred by the prefect Ulpian during the reign of Claudius Gothicus. After him came a Maximus, who it is said consecrated Pope St. Dionysius as pope. After him is the first continuous bishop of Ostia, another Maximus in 313. This is because he appears at the 313 Anti-Donatus Synod of Rome. The first bishop of Portus was a Hippolytus. This Saint Hippolytus was said to have rebuked the Roman magistrate for his persecution of Christians. This enraged the magistrate, who sentenced Saint Hippolytus to be thrown alive into a ditch with bound hands and feet. Just as a saint is hurled into the ditch, babies can be heard giving thanks to God. This Saint Hippolytus' identity is not quite clear. He has been identified with the famous Saint Hippolytus, who may have been an anti-pope and writer of refutation of all heresies. However, that saint is said to have died in exile in Sardinia, so that would not quite line up with the Ostian martyr. The diocese in which he lived rejects the identification with the other Saint Hippolytus. They say instead he was a disciple of Saint Clement, having either been an Arab or a Persian. Whatever the case of its early bishops, Ostia, much like the rest of the Christian world, would benefit from Constantine's conversion. The 4th century would see the construction of new buildings and the reconstruction of old ones for the Christian population of the city. The Basilica of Constantine shows the wealth the Christian population of Ostia possessed. The Basilica of Constantine would become the cathedral, that is, the seat of the Bishop of Ostia, until the 9th century. Tradition states that St. Gallicanus, after his retirement, endowed the church. Pope St. Marcus, who was pope in the year 336, would be the one to formally rule that the bishops of Ostia would be able to wear the pallium, and more importantly, be the ones to consecrate the Bishop of Rome. This role as papal consecrator would bring attention to the Bishop of Ostia. When there was a dispute between Pope St. Boniface and Eulallius over who would succeed Pope St. Zosimus, Eulallius' party would drag the sickly Bishop of Ostia out of his bed to consecrate him as pope. This dispute was only resolved by the Emperor Honorius, who declared for Boniface. The role of the Bishop of Ostia would expand in the early and high Middle Ages, gaining more influence in the global church, ironically having less over Ostia itself. As early as 707, the Bishop of Ostia would reside in Rome. The Bishop of Ostia would travel with Pope Stephen to France in 755 to anoint Pippin and his sons. Bishop Donatus would be sent to participate in the Council of Constantinople, which was held by Basil I of the Post-Photios, leading the Roman delegation and bringing letters of Pope Hadrian. Around the same time, in the 9th century, the cathedral would move to the Basilica of St. Aurea due to the collapse of the Basilica of Constantine. This is also due to Pope Gregory XIV's construction of Gregoriopolis, which took place from 827 to 844, fortifying the city against Muslim attacks. It should also be noted his successor, Leo IV, would win a naval battle against Islamic forces near the city in 847. The bishopric of Ostia would also be given to reformers in the church. Easily the most famous bishop of Ostia is the 11th century bishop, St. Peter Damian. This is not a video about St. Peter Damian, so I'll keep this description as brief as I can. St. Peter Damian was a hermit and disciple of St. Romuald. He was born in Ravenna and was the prior of the Benedictine monastery of Fonte Avellana, starting in 1043. St. Peter would be employed by 4 popes, being Gregory VI, Clement II, St. Leo IX, and Victor II. All 4 of them were part of the class of mid-11th century reforming popes. St. Peter would be asked to leave the monastery and become the Bishop of Ostia in order to more effectively assist in the governance of the church. This promotion greatly upset St. Peter. It would only be because of the threat of excommunication by Pope Stephen IX that he would accept the appointment. Stephen IX would die 1 year after appointing St. Peter in 1058. The next pope, Nicholas II, would make great use of St. Peter. St. Peter would convince the anti-pope John of Velletri to end his attempted usurpation. Nicholas would also send St. Peter to rebuke those in the Church of Milan who were guilty of simony. When Nicholas II died in 1062 and was replaced by Alexander II, St. Peter would convince another anti-pope, Cadolaus of Parma, to step down, also convincing the King of Germany, Henry IV, to accept the decision at the Council of Rome. In this very same year, Pope Alexander would allow St. Peter Damian to retire, allowing the saint to return to the life of a simple monk. St. Peter Damian would, however, even after his retirement as bishop, be called upon to serve the church. But that is beyond the scope of this video. Unfortunately, the previously mentioned Henry IV would imprison two bishops of Ostia who came after St. Peter Damian, being Gerard of Châtillon and Otho of Châtillon. It should be noted that at this point, now that the Pope is elected via the College of Cardinals, the Bishop of Ostia lost his status as the one who consecrated the new bishops of Rome. However, the bishops of Ostia crowned the popes, officiated imperial coronations, and engaged diplomatically as well as spiritually with the various rulers of the Christian world. Another change to the See of Ostia was that it would merge with that of Velletri, with Hughes being the first bishop of the combined cardinal bishopric in 1150. In 1175, when Frederick Barbarossa desired peace with the Lombard League and with the papacy, Pope Alexander dispatched Bishop Hubaldus of Ostia and Bernard of Porto. Throughout their journey north, they were shown great respect and gave the sacrament of confirmation as they traveled. This journey ended with Frederick receiving the bishops with honor and promising to make peace with the church. The cardinal bishops would lift the excommunications of the emperor and his counselors. Octavian, the cardinal bishop of Ostia from 1189 to 1206, would be tasked with getting Marquard von Anweiler, the regent of the King of Sicily, to submit to a papal mandate. When Octavian died, the role of Cardinal Archbishop of Ostia fell to Hugo, or Ugolino in Italian. Hugo would have quite the active career. Prior to becoming cardinal bishop, he was a member of Octavian's delegation to Marquard, being quite successful due to his Campanian background. In 1209, Hugo would be sent as a legate in the dispute over Holy Roman succession. Emperor Otto IV would be led to the oratory of St. Maurice so that he could receive holy unction from Hugo on the right arm and between the shoulders. After this, Hugo would be taken to Lombardy and Tuscany. He preached the Fifth Crusade, pacification of the communes, and against the spread of heresy. Hugo would grant a pre-existing church in Brescia to the Dominican order in order to achieve his goals of crushing heresy and civil strife in 1221. The cardinal believed peace between the Italian communes would be key to suppressing heresy. Hugo would also be brought to Umbria and Spoleto, securing already existing possessions of the church and providing administrative and spiritual assistance to female religious communities. To the south of these territories, at 1222 to 1223, Hugo would attempt to resolve a bitter dispute between the cities of Velletri, Cori, and Sormata on one side, and Ninfa, Seze, and Aquapuzza on the other side. Hugo would not abandon the city which he was bishop of, building walls and fortified towers to defend Ostia. He also constructed a hospital for the poor near the Anagni Gate in 1208. When Hugo became Pope Gregory IX, he would confirm the independence of this hospital from the Bishop of Anagni in 1234. Another great diplomat who would occupy the See of Ostia was Niccolo Albertini, also known as Niccolo de Prato. Niccolo was born to a prominent Tuscan family. He would join the Order of Preachers, studying at the University of Paris. He would see success as a theological lecturer, particularly at Florence and Rome. He would be made Procurator General of the whole Dominican Order. After that, he would become Master General. His last appointment prior to becoming Bishop of Ostia would be as Bishop of Spoleto in 1299. After this appointment, he was sent to reconcile Philip IV of France and Edward I of England. Niccolo would succeed in this seemingly unachievable task. In 1303, Benedict XI made Niccolo the Bishop of Ostia as well as Dean of the Sacred College. Niccolo would be sent to negotiate peace between the Guelphs and Ghibellines of northern Italy, specifically Florence. While Niccolo was received well by the people of Florence, he was unable to effect a lasting peace. Niccolo would leave the city in 1312, putting it under interdict. Niccolo also participated in the old duty of crowning the Holy Roman Emperor, in this case Henry of Luxembourg. Niccolo would die at Avignon. Niccolo de Prato would be the last of the non-French bishops of Ostia before the Avignon papacy. During this period, the bishops of Ostia would be French. It would be one of these French bishops, Pierre de Taine, who would convince the Pope to return to Rome. Bishop de Taine and the Bishop of Porto, Piero Corsini, would be sent to negotiate the Pope's return to the city. The negotiations stipulated the Pope maintain communal justice as well as revenues and that the civic officials of the Eternal City would swear an oath of fealty to the Pope. During the Great Western Schism, the position of the Bishop of Ostia was considered so important that all papal claimants appointed their own Bishop of Ostia. The two parallel lines of bishops of Ostia gave legitimacy to both episcopal lines, making it harder to determine who is the legitimate pope. The last holder of the See of Ostia we will talk about is Cardinal Alessandro Farnese. Farnese was born in 1520. He was a nephew of Pope Paul III, who made him a cardinal deacon of Sant'Angelo in 1534. He would hold such titles as Vice Chancellor of the Holy Roman Church and Governor of the city of Tivoli. In 1541, Alessandro would be made the legate to Charles V in order to help foster peace between him and Francis I of France. In 1546, Alessandro would accompany papal troops which participated in the Second Simcaldic War. He would also be involved in plans for a general council and to make an alliance with England. Prior to becoming Bishop of Ostia, Farnese would be involved in 6 conclaves. In 1580, Farnese would receive his final see. Previous to this, he had held multiple different bishoprics, this being the Bishopric of Ostia. With this appointment, he would also receive the role of Dean of the Sacred College of Cardinals. The titles of Bishop of Ostia and Dean of the Sacred College were necessitated to be held by the same person in this time. Farnese was a candidate in the conclave of 1585 but lost out to Pope Sixtus V. Alessandro Farnese was a greatly admirable man. Charles V admired his virtue, intellect, and decision-making ability. He was a great patron of the poor and orphans. Farnese was a participant at the Council of Trent and would be a great supporter of the council. He patronized art and architecture such as the Gesù Church of Rome and the Farnese Palace at Caprarola. He was a patron of the Benedictine and Servite orders. Farnese would die in 1589. The Reformation is a good stopping point for the history of the Bishop of Ostia, as the height of his secular power was closely tied with that of the Pope. As the Pope's influence on the world declined, so did the Bishop of Ostia's. Much of the key events for the Bishop of Ostia also occurred prior to the modern period. As can be seen from the history, the See of Ostia and its history were heavily intertwined with the history of the papacy. Bishops of Ostia would be the ones who would ordain and later enthrone the Pope. Many of them would end up becoming popes themselves. There is the aforementioned Gregory IX, but also Urban II, Benedict XI, Julius II, and many more. The bishops of Ostia did not just serve an internal function for the popes in Lazio, but were also the Pope's emissaries to the world. The bishops of Ostia would be the ones to anoint the Holy Roman emperors, go on various diplomatic missions to these emperors, as well as to the rest of Europe, whether it be Italy, England, France, Spain. Overall, the See of Ostia has had quite the storied history which deserves to be mentioned and not just neglected as just a minor facet of the history of the Roman See. Hopefully this video was informative if you made it this far. Goodbye and thank you for watching.